Let's go and get started. So thank you for attending this session. This is success stories about how to enable a strategic vendor dropship program. We're probably, if you're here to learn about technology and software, this is probably not the right place to be. We will talk some about technology and software, but really is how do you implement a successful dropship vendor program from a compliance, a government perspective, a management perspective, measurements, monitoring, control, and some lessons learned. So what I've got next to me is this gentleman here, Chad Hamby for GNC. You want to give a little bit of background about you?
Sure. Hey, I'm Chad Hamby. I've been with GNC now for a little over a year. Prior to that, I was with PetSmart for 13 years and have deployed dropship several times across several networks.
So my name is Jim Barnes. I happen to be the CEO of a company called Invista. We do have a order management system that does vendor drop shipping. GNC does use that platform today to enable vendor drop shipping across their network. And so let's just kind of get into it. If there's any questions, we can make this informal. It's not a big group. We're pretty casual, informal. So if there's questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll do our best to address them. We've got about 45 minutes. And if we need to open up to Q&A, we can, but feel free to ask questions. So look, this session is going to focus on a few things. Relationship management with a retail network, understanding that any vendor dropship program is cross-functional. It just can't be run by fulfillment or your digital team. It is truly cross-functional. Understanding the vendor relationships, how do you actually make sure the vendor is successful? They are an extension of you. And so that's an important mindset to understand. And then how do you manage exception management, ensure the customer experience goals are met when you actually start using a vendor to ship on your behalf, okay? The next slide, I'll let
Sure.
Go through GNC.
Yeah, so GNC was founded in 1931 by Mr. Shakiran. He's over 81 years old, or 80 plus years now. With the mindset of health and nutrition, started with 414 Wood Street, which is still has a small office there, just a bit more of historical than everything. We're on 6th Avenue now. We have 4,000 plus domestic stores, 200 plus in Canada, and then over 9,000 total when you include domestic and international across the world market that we service. We're the largest company devoted exclusively to helping its customers improve its lives, and we continue to grow and focus on e-commerce and on international growth.
Thanks, Chad. A few things just to continue at. I mean, you've got, 4,000 stores today, and there's a certain number that are corporate, certain number are franchisee?
Correct. So of that 4,000, about 35 or 3,200 are corporate stores. The remainder are franchisee stores that are maintained in several states, actually across all the states here in the United States. All the stores in Canada are corporate stores.
So when you guys decided to, prior to you, right, and you came on board, you had a mission to actually put together a drop ship solution. Can you kind of walk through some of the goals and objectives and some things that you guys were trying to accomplish?
Sure. One of the largest challenges that came from the merchant team was how do we expand the use of the web to bring on additional products that couldn't necessarily fit into a planogram in a GNC store. If you notice, if you've been into a GNC store, they're a smaller footprint, very concentrated level of product. But there are a lot of new vendors who wanted to leverage with GNC. The merchants wanted to leverage with them. So we looked at different options. One, we wanted to ensure that we didn't stretch our capacities within our own distribution centers. So we weren't necessarily interested in bringing them as web-only items per se into the DCs and have our own DCs distribute them. Then we also went through a financial model to ensure that the vendor would be profitable going through a drop ship model. And as I said earlier, we had installed Inspire in my previous life also, so we already knew the groundwork of the timing it would take to implement and process. So we spent a lot of time with the merchants to make sure that they understood that this wasn't just throw a kitchen sink at the model, that you had to have logical business reasons why we wanted to bring something on board, profitability model, service levels, expectations that we'll go through later on throughout the slides. So this was one of our first projects that we did as soon as I joined GNC, was to expand that footprint to allow the merchants to go to the trade shows, to have different options, and to move faster to bring product to market.
Yeah, so I'll add to this. So a few things that GNC's done in his previous life that we did as well. Why do you do vendor dropship? Well, one is obviously around inventory investment. I don't need to make the same inventory capital investment as I would, quite frankly, if I use perpetual inventory from someplace else. That's kind of a no-brainer. Two is to test product, right? So in the case of the fact that although GNC is vertically integrated, they do manufacturing for about 50% of the product, there's a lot of actual brands out there that, quite frankly, they like to carry, but it doesn't actually make sense from a capital perspective. So they can actually test product digitally before they actually bring it into a physical store type concept, right? So again, just leveraging the fact that I'm not making this huge investment. And for the other reason being, quite frankly, is from a conversion perspective, for those who have run digital organizations before, the bigger my item assortment is online, right? And I got one place to buy, doesn't give my customer a reason to go someplace else. So quite frankly, I'm expanding my digital content and my products online without actually having to expand the inventory component of it. So again, just a few reasons. And I think the other reason too, in terms of some of the products that we're drop shipping on behalf of GNC are refrigerated. So they don't have to go make a huge investment in refrigeration. For those who have built cold storage at $125 per square foot, it's expensive to go build refrigeration. So the vendor already has those capabilities. Let them continue to actually handle those specific SKUs. Okay, make sense? So really, I don't want to be too elementary about this, but in case you don't know what vendor drop shipping is drop shipping occurs when retailers or distributors directly utilize the vendor or third party inventory to fulfill the customer's orders. So there's a couple pillars that have to happen. You have to have vendor inventory visibility. You have to have that vendor item master or catalog. You have to be able to import that, manipulate that from the buyer perspective. You've got to select what assortment from that catalog. So you take an electronic catalog in, allowing the actual buyer or planner for that particular category to actually select what SKUs they want, put it into a staging environment. 9 times out of 10, that the person running digital is going to actually manipulate that content. So they're going to change romance notes. They may change the actual imagery of the actual item, but you have to provide that ability to actually provide that staging. Then you have to expose the actual item to multiple channels. So publish that item to different types of brands. So if GNC was running 4 or 5 brands, I think at one time you were running 2 brands, but now you're just down to 1.
Correct.
But if you had multiple brands, then publish that item to the actual digital sites as well. And then obviously, here comes the order, right? So the order is actually taken on the actual digital site. It drops in the cart. Well, on the back end, some of that inventory is perpetual and some of that inventory is non-perpetual. So the order management system is actually splitting those items based upon where that order or where that inventory is being sourced from. And then messaging, right, then doing obviously the appropriate messaging to the actual vendor. So if the vendor at one end is completely capable of doing EDI, electronic data interchange, that's great. But the other end, the vendor could be completely clueless about what EDI stands for, so you provide them a vendor portal to actually execute those particular processes. Pick, pack, ship, invoicing, carrier compliant labels, right? So, in a nutshell, that's really what vendor drop shipping is, from really inventory item management down to customer delivery, okay? So enough about this. We really want to kind of focus on how do you make a vendor dropship program successful, because it's more than just technology, and it's more than just putting the item on the site, right?
Absolutely. So there's 4 major organizations that you need to partner with as you're standing up and expanding on a dropship program. First and foremost is your merchants, ensuring that you're aligned with your merchants of what the rule set is to launch a product on the vendor dropship, number 1. Number 2, having clear direction of if that vendor isn't performing, what the actions or reactions will be. The supply chain is the next partner, from the execution of transportation, customer care, and what that expectation of how fast we react and manage by exception versus the daily transactions. Third is customer care, and ensuring that we make that as seamless to the customer, because the customer, is ordering from GNC. They don't necessarily care that it's coming out of a fulfillment center or a drop ship item, how we resolve and how we have the rule sets and the expectations of what's occurring. And finally, the IT organization, because of course is who's helping you support your technology and your implementation of your project. I will tell you that the biggest challenge that I faced all three times as we're launching is with the merchants, and not necessarily because they want to be difficult. It's simply just understanding what the rule sets are and the expectations, because merchants will be challenged that you need to launch 10,000 new items. Well, the easiest way for them to do is on a drop ship, but doesn't necessarily mean it's the most profitable method, and all the back end work that occurs is the same work that occurs from a technology standpoint and a item set up as it does if it's coming out of its distribution center. So ensuring that you're aligned on what that approach is, right? Same thing with the supply chain, of ensuring that you understand what locations you're shipping from, if you're going to have a significant amount of air to meet your 2-day commitment, etc. And just really building your business cases to reflect reality of where they're going to ship from, how fast they can service. We went into, the first time we did this, we went into a very hard fast that says you're going to do this, this, and this. The reality is that a lot of these are mom and pop startups, not necessarily on the GNC side, because there's a little bit more to that than there is selling a dog toy in the old life. But making sure that you can be flexible with your vendors and you have a system that can be configurable and flexible for them. So for example, if they don't work weekends, that you configure network days versus business days and those type of things, and looking at what your options are. But really being very clear on your expectations with your merchants of how fast it's going to take you to load, what the expectations are, and if the vendor's not performing. So we're very stringent when I say we have flexibility, but we have flexibility until we agree upon the rules. And then once we agree upon the rules, then we become stringent in enforcing that expectation, because we want to have a seamless transaction for the customer. We want to make sure that we're not appeasing in a great deal, right? So which drive out of your margin profitability. So we're very clear and concise if we believe that item's going to take longer than the standard product that's going to ship from a DC, and you build all the configuration on the front end. So as long as you partner, I found that if you partner with those 4 organizations, clearly set expectations and the ground rules, it makes the transition of the technology much cleaner and a faster process, and you're able to move vendors on faster because everybody understands what the ground rule expectations are.
Yeah. So let me just echo a few other things. So you look at this Venn diagram, focusing on outcome management. What does that mean? Right? So really defining what your picture of success looks like for this particular program. And that is both from a quality perspective, that's from a cost perspective, that's from an SLA perspective, that's from a customer experience perspective. Because if you think about it, right, you're trying to protect your brand. You want to make sure that your brand basically is represented the way that you would do it. You've got to put the governance in place and train that vendor as if basically they are an extension of you. Okay, so this is a very, very key point. If you are not going to take ownership of the vendor, right, just because you've given them an item to ship, if the mindset it's out of sight, out of mind, you will fail. Here's what's going to happen. 2 items are going to show up on time. The 3rd item in that order is going to show up a week later. And guess what? The 3rd item is required for the other 2 items. Let's say you're making something, it's a kit, right? So you just can't sit there and say, out of sight, out of mind, it's your problem. You've got to put the governance in place to ensure that the SLAs are being monitored or managed effectively. And as it relates to the outcome, and I think you did a great job on this, it is cross-functional. If we go to this next slide, the merchandising and purchasing team are key. The dropship operational teams are very, very key. The IT organization is key because you will be dealing with a number of integration points that we can talk about offline, but there's a number of integration points that are required to make this successful. And not all vendors are the same. Not all vendors have the same capability. And then obviously the huge point is the customer service side. The customer service side is mission critical because you can make one phone call to your own internal operation. You may have to be making multiple phone calls to track somebody on the vendor side who's actually managing that item. So You've got a number of customer service nightmares from that perspective.
Absolutely. We're very, as everyone is, very sensitive to the number of contacts that we drive into the contact center regarding WISMOs, where is my order? So we spend a lot of time with the vendors making sure they understand that if they are not going to deliver meet the expectations, that we trigger certain events in the background, which will trigger automated events to help avoid some of the contacts, but also help us measure the vendor in a more realistic manner, and then to make sure that we truly understand what is occurring and where the breakpoints are occurring and why we're not delivering. For example, we had this one vendor that we launched with right outside the box, outside the gate, that was a smaller vendor that was just struggled, but we helped partner with them to make them successful because we realized that they just simply, they committed up front that they were going to get it out in 48 hours. That just wasn't reality. So we modified the search to include that it's now 72 hours to get out. They did not lose sales. We drove the customer contacts down, and we set a more realistic expectation. By having the rule sets up front and then partnering with your merchant, in most cases, people are willing to shift in a relatively quick manner.
Yeah, so back to the actual retailer-vendor relationship. So again, it's aligning expectations of what you expect from them, how, right, when, and who. And again, taking accountability for the vendor. We put together within the Invist organization, we have an onboarding program that we actually onboard vendors. And there's a specific way to do it. We've learned this right or wrong through a lot of hard lessons with Walmart of how do you actually onboard vendors at a very, very large scale, and how do you nudge a vendor to comply, and what are the things you can do? You can't carry a big stick, right, all the time. So it's how do you carry a stick that's actually soft? It has to be soft, right? Because ultimately you want that vendor to succeed. If that vendor is not succeeding, I tell people that very simply, the vendor is an extension of you, but you want that vendor to succeed, because when they succeed, you succeed. So you really have to make it painless for them, right, to actually execute on your behalf. So again, establishing process and action plans, prioritizing timelines and assigned responsibilities, quick onboarding of new dropship vendors. We can bring on a vendor depending upon if it's EDI or not EDI, how fast now?
A couple of weeks now.
And we can bring up a vendor in a few weeks, right? If it happens to be using the vendor portal, actually it can even go faster.
Right.
So,
in most cases, the issues are internal about how fast we move and agreeing on the SKUs versus the actual technology and the amount of time it takes to ramp up.
The biggest thing too around the vendor, a lot of vendors themselves don't actually have order management systems, so they're not really segmenting, right, their inventory in terms of how much inventory they're giving you. And so there are ways from a technology perspective that we can protect inventory or really minimize. It is very simple. We use a concept called thresholds. And so if the vendor is sending us, if we're speaking in EDI speak, what's called an EDI 846, which is an item inventory balance by site, there are ways that we can actually change the inventory threshold, saying, you've burnt me before, I'm no longer going to allocate this item to you. So if you tell me you got 1,000 on hand, I'm going to say I've got 500 on hand, right? Because I know that your sell-through rate is much faster, because they themselves don't have the ability to actually segment that inventory in terms of, let's say, what GNC wants, right? So they give you an aggregate, right, for what's happening at a site, but you don't actually have prioritization on that inventory from that particular site. Does that make sense? So you got to protect yourself in terms of how much inventory they say that you have, because they're not sitting on infinite amount of inventory.
Right. So we have a rule set that is intended to prevent a vendor from providing perpetual inventory to say they have 9,999 units, because we want to protect the customer experience. So we monitor the updates and the feeds that they provide to ensure that what they're providing is realistic, and that we're consistently seeing an execution of the order in a timely fashion and delivery in a timely fashion.
The other key thing is around creating SLAs or service agreements. Your SLAs today for vendors, where are they at today? By the time, if an order drops before X, it's delivered when? Is it 24?
So if it delivers order drops before noon, it delivers within 72 hours.
72 hours, okay. We have got clients that are actually faster than that today on the portal. So if it drops before 3, it's being delivered, it's being shipped within 24 hours. Some vendors, quite frankly, can be same day. A lot of it has to do with their capabilities on their back end and how sophisticated they are. But the key point though is, if your SLAs internally are, let's say, same day ship before 3 o'clock, and the vendor, right, is not same day ship before 3 o'clock, this is a key point. Managing the expectation to the customer, right? Make sense? So there's a lot of need to actually proactively manage the customer expectation that this particular item that you put in the cart may take longer because it's a vendor dropship item versus this item's coming from my own self-distribution center. So again, managing those expectations are very, very key, okay? What we find is if you don't manage the expectation, that's where customer service, right, and overall SAT scores start to decline. Meaning that if I tell the customer that it's going to be there in 3 days, then it better be there in 3 days or less. But not communicating to the customer at all when it's going to happen, it's a no-no, right? It's better to sit there and it's going to take 7 days than not to tell them anything at all. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So,
and then reviewing performance, right? So you need to have, there's two things that we do, right? We want to provide, depending upon the size of the vendor, we want to do QBRs, so quality business reviews with that vendor on a quarterly basis, depending upon how much volume is going through the actual network. But the other thing you want to do, kind of using gaming theory, is you want the vendor to be self-monitor, right? You want to give them an attaboy. You want to give them metrics and measurements that sit there and say you're either in compliance or you're out of compliance. So one of the things that we do with the platform is that I can tell the vendor how they're performing against those SLAs. So order fill rates, delivery time rates, pack rates, so they know complete visibility that how they're performing relatively real time, okay? And then obviously depending upon the size of the vendor, you can sit down and do quarterly QBRs, okay?
So I cannot stress having the open line of communications, because in a lot of cases, the vendors believe they're doing the right thing. They may not be triggering the proper event. They have a lot of turnover, right? So we've trained, person X or the team of X as we started out, but they've transitioned. Knowledge necessarily didn't transition over. Customers actually getting the product, but they may not have triggered the systems and the activities. So, the management of exception, but also managing an open line of communication with the vendor to make sure they understand that there is an issue or an opportunity to how to escalate and escalate quickly, so that we can minimize any communication with the customer service team or the customer themselves.
Thanks. So this kind of is a good segue to overall compliance, right? So monitoring, ensuring you are synced with your vendors. So where's inventory? Where are orders? It's that infamous question, what we call it WISO, where's my order? For those who have run large call centers, 3 major inbound calls for those who have run large call centers, and they break down like this. Where's my order? Okay. You screwed up my credit card. No kidding. And I want to know more about your product. 3 major inbound phone calls, right? Again, where's my order? You screwed up my payment. And again, the complexity of this, the complexity of vendor dropship is depending upon how you auth, and we've got a lot of experience with this. We've learned this through the School of Hard Knocks. Where that item is being shipped from, how you auth, and how you settle, right? So a key example, most auths will stale after 7 days. If I got an item that's over 7 days, I'm gonna have to re-auth that particular credit card, right? And so there's a lot of components to vendor drop shipping beyond just item putting on the actual site. There's a lot of back-end nuances around payment as well. So again, how do I manage inventory? How do I manage orders? How do I manage shipping? If the shipping is third party, or it's either on your third party number or their number, the other key thing is tying out that freight cost. I mean, that in itself, surprisingly, is challenged. So ultimately, and this is a key point, you truly know the profitability of that order. And so if you're shipping out on your UPS or FedEx or USPS manifesting system, you've got your cost. But if you're not third-party billing, how do you control that? Next thing you know, you get an invoice for $100,000 and $20,000 of it's freight. you've just completely lost profitability of what's happening in that program. So again, tying it all together is mission critical. I don't know if you've got a couple horror stories there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that, again, lessons learned in the School of Hard Knocks is in the new agreements that we enter into, we dictate transportation. If the vendor chooses another method of transportation, then they'll pay the difference. We're only committed to paying what we've agreed to in our third-party agreements. I will tell you that the finance people don't necessarily enjoy that conversation, especially if we're trying to balance and we're credit and debiting, but it is a method to make sure that the vendor is performing. Because in some cases, what we're finding in this particular case is that something that could deliver to ground, they were using next day air, which was just driving our transportation cost and profitability through the roof. So,
the third bullet point is really around system monitoring, and so a little geek talk here. This is probably as important as just manage the overall operation, and I'll give you a good example. Let's say the vendor is 100% EDI today, so order drops. I'm going to convert that order into either an 850 or a 940, depending upon how my vendor spec has been written, and I'm expecting a 997 acknowledgement back. If that happens to be an item where the customer is paying for next day, and I don't get a 997 acknowledgement back, right? That's problematic. So the communication and the system monitoring isn't just around order, shipment, and inventory. It's also around data, making sure that the data flow and the workflows also are being monitored to ensure that the vendor is communicating with you proactively as well, right? And same thing with the vendor portal. The governance is that you will actually accept the order within 2 hours. 24/7, you'll accept it within 2 hours. If you do not give me an acceptance within two hours, I'm calling you. Why? Because ultimately, I got to make sure I don't impact that customer experience, and I got to take responsibility for it. So again, it's more than just order, inventory. There's a lot of data that's moving back and forth between the vendors, and you got to stay on top of it, is my point.
absolutely.
So vendor support and compliance, again, proper use of systems, issue resolution, any questioning. When we're running large vendor programs today, it's really a dialogue, right? We act as an extension on behalf of the actual shipper, and we've obviously got authority. The biggest authority stick is called payment. We actually do pay the bills on behalf of the actual shipper if they want, and quite frankly, when you start holding back payment, right or wrong, you start getting a little bit more action. So again, it's important that you have those vendor support and those compliance programs in place. Next slide, we're going to talk about if it flips. There we go. Protecting the brand.
Absolutely. So regardless if we have one vendor or 500 vendors, we're very clear with all our vendors that they are representing GNC. The packaging, the reflection of the product, and the communication and the rating and reviews are all associated with GNC. So we go through a pretty stringent process with the merchants. So the merchants, I should say, go through a more stringent process just to ensure that we're all 100% aligned on what the expectations are. Again, if you start out with clean expectations, clean rule sets for both yourself and for the vendor, you'll find that that it will move much quicker. For us, as I said, in the first time we did this, we were very stringent with our rules and not very flexible. We found that we were failing more than we were being successful, but the moment we started adapting to the reality of certain vendors, especially the smaller mom and pops who are just starting out, that may not have a lot of inventory, what the expectation is there and how fast we could turn it in. Also, changing the automation to make it easier for these smaller vendors to leverage the portal and basically having a one-stop shop also helped drive to protect the brand because it helped move that order in a timely fashion.
Chad, talk about, we've been speaking about the forward logistics component of this, right? But the return component, right, is actually as if not more complicated to do returns from that dropship vendor. So you speak to some of your experience around that?
Sure. So from an e-com standpoint, if they return it through e-com, we're centralizing to one facility to make it easier because none of the facilities, of course, have the product, so there's all non-POG. So it just makes it a clean and more efficient process. The more radical, of course, is the stores, especially if you're a franchisee. It is a non-POG product. What's the back-end systems of how to return the product, et cetera. So we've we believe that we've written, stores may disagree, but we believe we've written a pretty clean process that allows the non-POC process to work, and then how the reversal occurs on their end, and how we could sell that product if it's in a sellable condition. That in itself, store operations, I should have brought that up as the fifth partner that you need to work with, especially on this, was probably the longer tent in the pole of our pole intent of how we were actually going to deliver the process.
Yeah, I think that's a key, because think about it, right? If it's an item that you don't sell with perpetual inventory, and you're trying to provide a unified commerce experience, taking an item that you don't sell and returning it back to the store. So the return shouldn't be a four-letter word. It should actually be a way or opportunity. But from a technology perspective and integration perspective, how do you make that seamless, right? That store's never seen that item before. They may not be able to sell that item. And so if I can't sell that item, then ultimately how do I get it back to the vendor or get it back to a return center? Which, again, there's some complexities on how you handle the reverse side. And I think the last bullet point here around trust and verify. So one of the things that we do is that we will go out and do audits of the vendors, right? Again, we want to make sure that they are successful, they are an extension of us, and so therefore we'll physically go perform audits, especially for what I call mom and pop vendors who this is their first rodeo. We want to make sure that we'll go out and audit their processes, help them from a lean perspective to ensure they're successful. So, and this kind of goes back to exception management, right? Management by exception. Practice whereby only the information indicates a significant deviation of the actual result, right? Based upon budget or plan results and brought to management attention. So we have a whole detection, process improvement, evaluation, and resolution governance program that we put in for vendors. We're not talking about managing one vendor. Our experience is managing 4,000 to 5,000 vendors. So there's a whole governance program that we've actually established at Envista. You've used it twice. Success, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
So again, the key is it's a systemic approach, right? So we're not chasing norms, we're chasing those particular exceptions. A lot of that is right or wrong technology centric that allows us to understand when something isn't happening. We just caught something just recently with you guys. I think it was around payment and off. That's why it came up in my mind. You want to kind of walk. We caught this before it actually became a serious problem in terms of the way that tokens were being handled. So again, if you've got the self-monitoring in place, the point here is to move from reactive to proactive, and then from proactive to what I call predictive. And so again, having things like AI or machine learning in the actual platform to actually help you are mission critical. So
that also allows you to really track if you're seeing problems at a vendor rather early, especially if there's a large turnover, whether different processes that we can react faster, proactively per se, from the website to modify, either suppress the inventory, change the lead time days, etc., to ensure that we are not driving additional contacts, but yet still maintaining the relationship with the vendor.
So just, we're going to finish up early, about 10 minutes, and we'll take Q&A, but actual takeaways is, really, if you learned anything today, it's about relationship management, right? It's still people doing business with people. And so there are relationships that have to be built to make a strong vendor dropship program actually succeed within your environment. You got to protect the brand. Ultimately, the vendor has a responsibility, but you have to take accountability for that particular brand. So you got to protect the brand to make sure you choose vendors that are going to represent you in the best way. And then exception management and meeting customer experiences, having a strong operational team that's dedicated to these vendors. And we've seen the vendor relations being managed in certain areas. We've seen it where the merchants have owned the vendor relationships. We've seen it where supply chain has actually owned the vendor relationship. And the reason why supply chain may own the relationship is some of these same vendors also may be what I call perpetual vendors, meaning that they're actually you're issuing POs to them for perpetual inventory in your own distribution center network, but they're also doing drop ship as well. So it can be an and, or it can be an or. So I mean, without further ado, unless you have anything to add, we can do Q&A.
All right.
So any questions? We may not have the answers, but we'll definitely take your question. Any questions? Yep. You want to can we get her a microphone? Is that possible? JJ, can you grab her a microphone? Barely. We got a lot of background noise back here behind us. Sorry.
I know you talked a lot about the retailer benefits. How about on the vendor side?
Yeah, for us especially, 3 vendors in particular that we're launching with now was their first foray into health. So by giving them this opportunity, with also that if it takes off from where it is, then there could be a GNC exclusive brand in the brick and mortar. So there's a lot of things the merchants are working with the vendors to help entice them also. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, if you want to create a win-win situation, right? And if the vendor, regardless how size, if you think about it, right, it's new revenue without actually spending the marketing dollars, right? Unless there's some kind of subsidy in the back end, and there's things we've done there as well. But quite frankly, it's free revenue. They don't have to spend any money on advertising. It's not their e-commerce platform. The advantage of them is just literally, I'm exposing my inventory to you, and I'm going to comply with a fulfillment operation. I mean, it's a win-win. One of the things that we didn't mention with our platform, right or wrong, is it is an order management system that actually does vendor dropship. And the reason why I say this is important is a larger vendor may actually have multiple DCs. So we're just not saying, here is the order, you deal with it. If I know where inventory is by site, I'm actually allocating the inventory to that site. That's important because if the distributor or the retailer is in a multi-DC network as well, I'm not, if the customer's in LA, right, and I've got a DC in Phoenix, and the vendor's got a facility in let's say, Bakersfield and Columbus, Ohio, I'm not saying ship the item from Columbus. I'm saying, hey, I'm sourcing all the inventory. I can actually get this to you in a 2-day, 3-day, or next day type of environment, right? So which is very important. So to answer your question, it's creating a win-win situation, right? Most vendors want to be on a program like this because I hate to say it's free revenue, but it's free revenue. So any other questions? Yep. Go for it.
By the way, Mr. Managed the third-party dropship when my company OnTrack started doing business for Walmart. Went very well, thank you. It was an easy process. But regarding
Thanks for the plug.
Say in the mic one more time. I work for a regional parcel carrier, and when Walmart came to do business with us, the dropship vendor program was managed by Invista, and it went very smoothly. It was very easy to deal with. My question about that is parcel costs. I've heard different things with that. If you're shipping from their main DC, you're going to get their main rate. In years past, say you're Walmart and it's shipping for with FedEx as an example. I heard recently I think it was UPS added an extra cost for that if they're being shipped from a third-party location. And I've also heard in other instances there's a completely different set of rates because the same volume is not coming out of that third-party origin. Can you talk about that at all?
No, I mean, look, that's a key, right? So when you, so what you said is 100% correct. So I appreciate the question. The overall cost of that parcel is going to differ because of the volume coming from a centralized distribution network versus a decentralized network or that vendor, especially if it's a small vendor, right? And so rates can apply. The key is understanding going into it, right? The complete profitability of that vendor before you bring that vendor on. I mean, we had a client, right or wrong, that was trying to ship socks, and I'm like, why? I mean, you're shipping something light, you're shipping socks. Why is this vendor even under dropship program, right? If you want to test them, take that from a vendor dropship item, non-perpetual, and make it perpetual, right? And so, to answer your question, you are 100% correct. There are different rates that do apply. Now, I'm not saying that they can't be negotiated, right? We do carrier sourcing. You can negotiate, right, some of those accessorial charges out if you have enough volume, right? And these guys, I don't want to, I mean, we're under NDA, but they spend a lot of money on parcel. Those are things I can negotiate out, right? But if you don't know what to ask for, you're not going to get it. So it's a good question. Anybody else? Thoughts? Oh, we got one over here.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you have any feedback on retailers' results as far as them adding expanded assortments to their existing lines. Is it becoming a big, do you have any type of stats on that? How much added sales? I know each industry is different, but any type of feedback on that?
And you could probably talk about your past life. I mean, this GNC is relatively new, but your past.
Yeah, so in the past life, especially with the different type of vendors that could onboard with in Phoenix, we saw a substantial growth. I mean, it became a division of its own by the first year because it had so much larger growth than just the standard e-com.
Yeah. So if you think about this, right? If you are in apparel retail, you're in shoes, you're in this case the pet industry, which is growing leaps and bounds. You gotta balance, right? The perpetual inventory that you're going to buy. So you got a tremendous amount of working capital. You've got carrying costs to store that inventory as well. So it's really understanding your total, what I call contribution margin on an e-com order, all in, end-to-end. We've seen some retailers where, right or wrong, it's almost 20-30% is being vendor drop shipped. But again, it depends upon the category of product. So, I mean, I hate to say it depends, but it does depend. I've seen it high as 1% of sales, and I've seen it as high as 30% of sales. So the key thing is that we know on the digital side, the bigger the item assortment, right, my better my conversion. Period. Right. If I can give a reason to have you on that digital site longer, because my item assortment is larger, I'm going to improve my conversion by between 2 to 5 basis points. Right? We've done enough analysis to know that when I expand it, I'm going to improve conversion. Okay. Any other questions? We got about 1 minute and 47 seconds left. So, okay. If there's no questions, look, appreciate it. I want to thank Mr. Chadwick Hamby here of GNC for participating in this presentation. Again, Jim Barnes with Invista, thanks to all of you guys. We appreciate the questions. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. And my marketing team told me if you want to come see us, we're in booth 4249, right? There you go. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the exits as our crew prepares this room for the next session. Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the exits as our crew prepares this room for the next session.
We live in the era of the Internet of Things, where the physical world is connected